Welcome to Infidelity Tales. If you're new, please subscribe to our channel and like this video. It only takes a second, but it gives us motivation to create more stories, so please like this video. And now, let's start the story. It all happened during the quiet hours of the night. Back then, the idea that I would one day share my story with anyone, let alone the world, felt absurd. My struggles felt too personal, too messy, too ordinary to matter. And yet, here I am, with a divorce behind me, a teenage son growing faster than I can keep up with, and a life that feels both predictable and overwhelming. I am 49 years old, caught in the tangled web of midlife. My work as a night shift nurse demands patience, stamina, and empathy. Each evening I step into a world that rarely sleeps, a world filled with suffering but also glimmers of hope. The battles I fight in those long hours wear on me, body and soul. Fatigue has become my invisible companion. The days blur into each other, sleep, work, repeat. Somewhere along the way, I began to feel like I was fading. But even in that fog, something beautiful appeared in the most unexpected place. A bowling alley. What started as a small distraction became a quiet obsession. A year ago, I joined a local league on a whim. I didn't expect much, but instead I found something I hadn't realized I was missing, a sense of purpose, a reminder of who I was before life became so complicated. To my surprise, I grew good at it. Really good. Good enough to qualify for a regional competition 3 hours away. It was a small triumph, but it belonged to me. For the first time in years, I wasn't just fulfilling duties, I was chasing a dream. Still, I couldn't escape the pull of motherhood. My son, just entering those turbulent teenage years, had been struggling. He was restless, moody, acting out in ways I couldn't quite decode. A recent incident, his friend accidentally damaging our garage door, still echoed in my mind. I couldn't bear the thought of leaving him alone during my tournament. So, I booked us both into a modest hotel near the competition, hoping the change of scenery would be good for both of us. The hotel was simple but cozy, with an indoor pool that shimmered like a small luxury. That first morning, I woke early and tiptoed into his room. He was curled under the blankets, clinging to sleep like any teenager would. I nudged him awake with the promise of pancakes, and he mumbled something about syrup that made me laugh. It was such a small thing, but it filled me with tenderness. We ate breakfast together in the dining hall, pancakes, bacon, omelets, fruit. I watched him pile his plate high and marveled at how easily food could bring joy back into his eyes. The sunlight filtered through the windows, and for a moment, life was calm. When I asked if there was anything he wanted to do before I returned to the bowling alley, his face lit up. He wanted to visit a gaming store in a nearby shopping mall. His eyes sparkled in a way I hadn't seen in weeks, so we went. The mall was bustling with noise and life. Teenagers clustered in groups, parents trailed behind toddlers, and the air hummed with ordinary routine. At the game store, his gaze locked on a vintage title he had been searching for. It was expensive, more than I'd planned to spend, but when I saw the quiet hope on his face, my resistance crumbled. I bought it. He whispered a soft thank you, the kind that reached deeper than words. We wandered the mall afterward, people watching and reminiscing about old times. For a few hours, we weren't burdened by responsibility or worry. We were just mother and son, walking side by side, as if time had slowed down just for us. Later that day, I returned to the competition with my heart still warm. I bowled well, holding second place for most of the day, but fatigue caught me in the final rounds, and I slipped to fifth. It stung, but I reminded myself that not all victories are about trophies. Some are about showing up. My friend Sarah, a fellow league member, won first place. We celebrated at a small tavern that night. Laughter, soft music, clinking glasses. It had been a long time since I felt part of something. I let myself relax with a glass of wine, surrounded by camaraderie, and for once, I wasn't just a nurse, or a mother, or a tired woman. I was simply me. By the time I returned to the hotel, it was close to 1 a.m. My son was asleep, the glow of the television flickering across his peaceful face. I changed quietly, brushed my hair, and slipped into bed. Reflection came like a wave. Our breakfast, his smile at the store, the competition, the laughter at the tavern. My heart was full. At 3 a.m., I heard him stir. I checked on him instinctively. He was fine, just turning in his sleep. Yet even that small moment felt sacred. Lying there in the dark, I realized something profound. Life is not defined by routines or responsibilities. It is made of moments, the whisper of syrup over pancakes, the sparkle in his eyes when I handed him the game, the sound of pins scattering at the alley, the soft rhythm of his breathing in the next bed. Joy doesn't always arrive in grand fireworks. Sometimes it comes in quiet breakfasts and shared smiles, in the peace of knowing the person you love most is safe beside you. That night, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Peace. Not because everything was perfect, but because everything was real. The next morning, he teased me about pancakes again, and we found ourselves back at the breakfast hall, as if the day before had been gently reborn. We laughed, ate, and lived in the simple beauty of being together. On the way to the competition that morning, I thought about how every bend in the road was leading me not only to the alley, but back to myself. The woman I once was, the one filled with ambition, passion, and hope, was still inside me. She had just been buried under years of duty and fatigue. The competition wasn't just about scores. It was about resilience. It was about remembering that even when life feels impossible, there are still chances to rediscover who we are in the most ordinary, unexpected places. That trip reminded me of something important. Even when life is heavy with responsibility and sacrifice, there is always space for love, joy, and new beginnings. A mother's love, a son's smile, a passion that sparks in the middle of fatigue. Every moment with him is a reminder of why I push forward. Every smile, every restless shift in his sleep, every whispered thank you is a light guiding me through the long nights. And so, as I lay awake in that hotel bed, listening to his steady breathing, I made a quiet vow to myself. I would not let life pass me by unnoticed. I would hold on to these fragments of joy. I would learn from every failure, let go of what no longer served me, and keep chasing the moments that make me feel alive. Because at the end of it all, life is not about perfection. It is about presence. And as long as I have that, these quiet mornings, these fragile, beautiful connections, I know I am not just surviving. I am still living. Her heart was breaking, yet she smiled through her tears. She had given him everything, every breath of her soul, every piece of her fragile heart. But he treated her love like it was too much, too heavy to carry, when all she wanted was for him to hold it gently, not to throw it away. Nights became colder. She would lie awake staring at the ceiling, listening to the silence of her house. The bed felt too wide, her chest too empty. Memories of his voice filled her ears like whispers from a dream she could not return to. She wanted to forget him, but forgetting him felt like forgetting herself. Each morning she walked slowly through the world, carrying her pain like an invisible weight. People around her laughed, lived, loved, but her heart remained trapped in yesterday. She was present, yet not alive. Her soul still reached out for him, even though she knew he had already let go. Sometimes she would sit by the window, watching the rain run down the glass. The drops reminded her of her tears, small, endless, falling without control. She would whisper his name to the wind, as if maybe the sky would carry her voice to him, as if maybe he would hear and remember that once she was his safe place. But he never came. And so she learned that love can be both a blessing and a wound. It can lift you high, and it can break you into pieces so small you barely recognize yourself. Yet, in her brokenness, she began to see something she had forgotten, herself. Slowly, painfully, she started to gather her pieces, not to give them away again, but to keep them safe. Love had hurt her, but love had also taught her. She had loved too deeply, too completely, and though it left her empty, it also proved she was capable of a heart larger than silence, larger than loss. Her tears watered the ground of her soul, and from them, someday, something new would bloom. Days turned into weeks, yet the ache inside her never softened. She carried it like a shadow that followed her everywhere. At the market, while choosing fruits, she would suddenly remember the way he once reached for her hand in the same aisle. At night, brushing her hair, she would see his reflection in the mirror of her memory, standing behind her, smiling softly as if she was his world. Now, the mirror only gave her back her own tired eyes. Her friends told her to move on, to let go. They said time heals everything. But what they didn't understand was that her heart was not a wound, it was a grave. Inside it lay all the laughter, all the promises, all the pieces of love he left behind. Time did not heal graves. Time only made them quieter. Some evenings she would walk to the old park where they first met. The bench where they had sat together still stood there, untouched by the storm of years. She would sit on it, close her eyes, and pretend he was beside her, their shoulders brushing, their hearts beating in rhythm. She would whisper, "Do you remember?" But the wind gave no answer. And yet, inside the silence, she began to feel something stir. A small voice, faint but steady, reminding her that her story did not end with him. That love, even when lost, was never wasted. Every tear she shed was proof that she had lived, that she had felt something so strong it carved itself into her soul. One night, as she lay in bed, the moonlight spilled across her face. She realized she had stopped waiting for his return. Her tears still came, but they no longer begged for him. Instead, they cleansed her, washed her of the heaviness of holding on. She placed her hand on her chest, feeling her own heartbeat. For the first time in a long while, she whispered not his name, but her own. It was then she understood. The love she gave was never meant to destroy her. It was meant to show her the depth of who she was. Yes, he had left, but she remained. And inside her remained a heart that could still give, still shine, still hope. So she decided not to close her heart, but to guard it. Not to stop loving, but to learn loving herself first. She would carry the memory of him like a pressed flower, fragile, faded, but still beautiful in its own way. The mornings were always the hardest. She would wake up, stretch her hand across the empty side of the bed, and remember again that he was gone. That space used to be warm, filled with the quiet sound of his breathing, the steady weight of his presence. Now it was nothing but silence and cold sheets. She would sit at the edge of the bed for long minutes, her fingers tracing the fabric as if it could bring him back. Sometimes she would whisper, "Good morning," though no one answered. The house echoed with her loneliness. She began keeping little journals, writing down her thoughts each day. At first, they were letters to him, long, aching pages where she told him everything she wished he could still hear. "I miss the way you laughed at things no one else found funny. I miss how your hand fit around mine, like it was made for me." Writing gave her a way to pour out what her heart could not hold. But over time, the letters changed. They became less about him and more about her. She began to write about her pain, her fears, her strength, and the small victories of her days. Even though she still cried often, she also began noticing the little details of life again. The golden light through the trees at dusk. The smell of bread baking from the bakery down the street. The way a child's laughter cut through the heaviness of her thoughts. These small things reminded her that the world was still turning, and somehow, she was still a part of it. There were moments, too, when the grief returned like a storm, sudden, heavy, impossible to escape. She would collapse on the floor of her room, clutching her chest as if the weight of loss was too much to carry. But after the storm passed, she always found herself breathing again. Every time she rose, she was a little stronger, even if she didn't see it yet. One afternoon, she visited the old bookstore where she and he used to wander for hours. She thought it would break her, but instead it gave her comfort. The shelves were the same. The air smelled of paper and dust, and for a moment, she could almost feel him beside her. She picked up a book he once loved, held it to her chest, and whispered, "I'll carry you with me." That night, something shifted inside her. She realized she didn't need to erase him from her life to move forward. She didn't need to stop loving him to start loving herself. His memory could live inside her, not as a wound, but as a reminder of the depth she was capable of. She began walking more. Each evening she went to the park, watching the sun set slowly, painting the sky with colors that reminded her of hope. She started talking to strangers again, an old woman feeding pigeons, a little boy chasing after his dog. She smiled softly, shyly, but it was still a smile. Healing didn't come all at once. Some days she fell back into sorrow, but she no longer feared the sadness. She had learned that it was a part of love too. Love did not die when people left. It only changed its shape. And one evening, standing under the soft glow of streetlights, she lifted her head to the sky and whispered, "Thank you for loving me once, for teaching me how deep a heart can go." And though no answer came, she felt lighter, freer, like her soul had been gently touched by peace. Her story was still unfolding, and though she did not know what awaited her, she knew this. She was still alive, and she still had love within her. There was a pull I could not explain, a strange certainty that wrapped itself around me. I felt like a stranger inside my own body, watching myself from a distance, detached, yet tethered to the moment by something stronger than reason. The weight of expectations, of rules and boundaries, seemed to fade into the background, leaving only the raw pulse of the present. My legs trembled as I moved toward his bed. The room was dim, the glow of the television painting shadows that danced and flickered across the walls. My heart pounded so loudly it felt as if it might break through my chest. At the edge of his bed I paused, unable to breathe. His presence filled the space, warm, magnetic, impossible to resist. I hesitated. My hand hovered above him like a silent question. Slowly, I pulled the blanket aside, just enough to see his face. His eyes were open, wide with surprise, but there was something else too, something unspoken, something I couldn't name. It was him, and yet not the boy I had always known. The familiar lines of his face seemed to blur, shifting into something new, something both strange and deeply familiar. I reached out, my fingers trembling as they brushed against his hand. His skin was warm, alive, and the touch sent a shiver racing through me. "Let me help," I whispered, my voice barely audible in the stillness. My eyes lingered on him, tracing every detail, the quiet strength in his frame, the subtle shift from youth into something deeper, older. The air between us grew heavy, charged with emotions neither of us could name. He did not pull away. Instead, his gaze locked with mine, filled with questions and something that felt like longing. My breath quickened. Every touch was electric, every second stretched into eternity. A soft sound escaped his lips, uncertain yet unresisting. "Do you want this?" I whispered again, my voice breaking under the weight of the moment. He gave the smallest nod, silent but clear. That single gesture shattered the distance between us. We leaned into the unknown together, guided by instinct, by a force greater than reason. His hand found my hair, tentative at first, then firmer, as though he, too, was surrendering to what neither of us could stop. A rush of emotions flooded me: connection, longing, guilt, desire. It was as if we were caught in a current, swept away by something stronger than either of us. Every breath, every heartbeat felt like a confession. We had crossed a line, and the world outside seemed to vanish. When the storm of that moment quieted, silence settled around us. We lay side by side, our breaths mingling in the stillness, our hearts beating out of rhythm, but somehow together. The air was thick with emotions we could not speak, the weight of what had happened pressing down like a heavy blanket. "We can't keep doing this," I whispered at last, though even as I said the words, they felt hollow. They were a fragile attempt to hold on to rules that already seemed broken. He didn't answer. His silence said everything. This was wrong, but it was also real. We tried to talk, to make sense of it, but our words fell apart before they reached the air. Yet even in our guilt, something stronger kept pulling us back together. The spark between us had been lit, and it was fierce, undeniable. I told myself it could not happen again. I promised myself it was a mistake. But the truth pressed harder than the promises. I wanted it again. The boundaries between us, between right and wrong, had blurred, maybe even vanished. And the more I thought about it, the less I wanted them back. It became a secret we carried together, heavy and dangerous, yet alive with its own pulse. Guilt lingered in the background, whispering of consequences, but it was often drowned out by the thrill of possibility. I began to imagine new moments, new risks, new ways of reaching for him when no one was watching. The thoughts came unbidden, bold and frightening, reshaping everything I believed about myself. What if this was more than a mistake? What if it was the beginning of something I couldn't control? And so, I leave you with this question, the same one that haunted me every time I looked into his eyes. If you found yourself caught in a whirlwind of forbidden connection, pulled by a force stronger than reason, would you turn away to protect what you know? Or would you surrender to the spark and let it rewrite everything? The hours that followed were heavy, wrapped in silence, neither of us dared to break. I sat at the edge of the bed, staring at my hands as though they held answers. He lay still, his chest rising and falling in uneven breaths, and I wondered if his heart was racing as wildly as mine. The weight of what had just happened pressed down on us, a secret too large to be spoken aloud. I told myself it was a mistake, a fleeting storm that would pass. But the truth was there, buried beneath every breath. I didn't regret it. I regretted the world outside, the rules, the consequences, the judgment, but not the moment itself. The moment had felt too real, too alive. That night, I went home carrying 1,000 voices in my head. Some screamed of betrayal, others whispered of possibility. I lay awake until dawn, staring at the ceiling, replaying his eyes, his touch, the way silence had wrapped around us after everything. It was wrong, I knew. Yet my heart longed for it again, like a flame aching for more fuel. The days that followed were filled with tension. When we crossed paths, our eyes would linger too long, speaking words our mouths couldn't dare to form. A simple brush of his hand against mine felt like fire. A glance across the room carried 100 unspoken promises. The distance between us became unbearable, yet the closeness was dangerous. We tried to avoid each other, but it only made the pull stronger. It was as though every step I took away from him led me back to the same place, standing at the edge of his presence, my heart trembling with want and fear. He, too, seemed trapped in the same storm. There were moments when his jaw tightened, when he looked at me as though he was fighting a battle inside himself. But the battle was already lost. One evening, I found myself outside his door again. I don't even remember walking there. My body moved before my mind could argue. The hallway was quiet, the world asleep, and I stood there with my hand hovering over the handle. I told myself to turn back, to leave, to bury this before it consumed us both. But my heart would not let me. When the door opened, he looked at me as if he had been expecting me all along. No words were spoken. They weren't needed. The silence between us was louder than anything we could have said. I stepped inside, and the air shifted. The same magnetic pull, the same heavy tension that had filled the room before. We sat together, close but not touching, until finally his hand reached for mine. Just that, his hand closing around mine, was enough to break every defense I had left. We leaned into the space between us, the world blurring, the lines we'd sworn to protect dissolving again. But this time afterward, something was different. The silence was heavier, the guilt sharper. We lay there, side by side, yet both of us knew we were falling deeper into something neither of us could escape. I whispered, "This will destroy us." He turned his face toward me, his eyes filled with a sadness that mirrored my own. "Maybe," he said softly, "but I can't stop." His words struck me like truth carved into stone. I couldn't stop either. Even if it cost me everything, the pull between us was too strong. And so it began. Not a single mistake, but a series of nights, each one binding us tighter together. We became shadows of ourselves by day, but by night we were fire, reckless and alive. Every touch carried both sweetness and sorrow. Every glance was a promise we couldn't keep. We were caught in a web of our own making, woven with secrecy, stitched with desire, tangled with guilt. And though we both knew the ending would hurt, still we kept going because stopping felt impossible. The nights blurred into each other, each one heavier than the last. Every time I told myself, this must be the last time, I would find myself back in his arms, back in that dangerous comfort that both healed and broke me. I carried guilt like a second skin, yet beneath it burned a hunger that would not die. In the daylight, I tried to live as though nothing had changed. I spoke with the same voice, smiled with the same lips, carried out the same daily routines. But deep inside, I knew I was no longer the woman I had been before. My thoughts wandered to him endlessly. His voice lingered in my head, his touch haunted my skin, and the memory of his eyes, those eyes that saw me more deeply than anyone else ever had, would not let me go. He was no better. I could see it in the way he looked at me, his gaze heavy with secrets. Sometimes, across a crowded room, our eyes would meet, and I could feel the entire world slip away for a moment. Then, almost in panic, one of us would look away. But the damage was already done. A single glance was enough to remind us of the fire we were hiding, the fire that was consuming us in silence. Weeks passed like this. We lived in the shadow of what we had done, yet we kept returning to it, as though we were powerless. One evening, when the weight of the silence became too much to bear, I asked him, my voice breaking, "Why do we keep doing this?" His answer was raw, stripped of any disguise. "Because with you, I feel alive. And without you, I feel nothing." The honesty of his words cut me open. I wanted to deny it, to tell him he was wrong, to remind us both of the lives we were destroying. But my heart betrayed me. I felt the same. He was the breath I hadn't known I was missing, the piece of myself I thought had been lost long ago. Still, the guilt was relentless. At night, after leaving him, I would lie awake trembling, listening to the sound of my own heartbeat, asking questions I couldn't answer. How long could this go on before the truth came out? How long before someone noticed the change in my eyes, the shift in my voice, the distance I could no longer hide? One evening, as I tried to leave his side, he caught my hand and whispered, "Stay." "I can't," I replied, my throat tight with tears. "If I stay, I'll lose everything." He pulled me closer, his voice low and trembling. "Then let me lose with you." The room grew still, and my chest ached with the weight of his words. No one had ever loved me in such a reckless, selfless way. He wasn't thinking of the ruin, of the broken pieces we'd leave behind. He was thinking only of me, of holding on no matter the cost. And in that moment, I realized the truth. We were no longer at the edge of danger. We were already falling. The only question left was how far we would go before the world caught us.